What's the actual cost when a team of billion people can't stand being in the same room together? And what changes when you start treating the relationship itself, not just the people in it, as a living system with its own logic? That's the territory we get into today with Michael Porcelli, founder of Meta Relating. We talk about why saying, "I don't know," might be the most powerful move a technical leader can make. Why the leap from complicated problems to complex ones breaks most engineers' brains, and what he found when he walked into a room full of AI safety researchers and asked them to look at their own dynamics. This is Living Code. I'm Andrew. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to the Living Code podcast. I am delighted to be here today with Michael Porcelli, otherwise known as Porch, and he's the CEO and the founder of Meta Relating, a framework for relational communication that treats how we work together as seriously as what are we working on. Michael, or Porch, I guess. I don't know if we're at that level of relating where I can call you Porch, but Porch,
comfortable with.
Porch started working out in Bay Area startups, doing software engineering at places like HP and other startups, and then did something that almost never happens, which is pivoting from building systems of code to building systems of human connection. And we'll talk about why that often is not the strong suit when people go from being individual contributor into managers and leadership. You've got a graduate degree in spiritual psychology. And I think when I saw you on LinkedIn, because we were doing something similar, leadership training for technical leaders, I'm like, wow, this guy, I feel like we could speak the same language. But then you became director of training at the Integral Center in Boulder, which originally created under the inspiration and guidance of Ken Wilber, and then became a certified holacracy coach. And you and I've talked about that before. You've trained venture capitalists in people skills. You've supported AI safety researchers in understanding their own team dynamics, which feels really juicy to me, and then introduced self-management frameworks to the effective altruism movement. And you're basically the person that people call when brilliant people can't stand being in the same room together.
You can put it that way.
So delighted to have you here, Michael. Thank you so much for joining.
It's great to be here, Andrew. I'm excited about today's conversation.
Yeah, and so I love that we're both kind of playing with this interaction between people building sophisticated technical systems and all of the challenges that go along with that, and the building the human systems that go along, which really, in my mind, kind of makes or breaks the effectiveness of teams. So how did you get started on that, going in that direction, would you say?
Well, I think what had me finally take the leap was just ongoing frustrations in my own world, relationally. Like I was like, well, I feel like I should be having more influence or more of an impact, or I should be earning other people's more respect than I am. I went from thinking like it's everybody else's problem to like, maybe it has something to do with me. Part of that was coming from, I was doing therapy at the time and coaching and just deep diving into all kinds of personal growth stuff. In part also motivated from frustrations with intimate relationships, which just at that time in my life just felt very confusing and frustrating to me. But I was sort of trying everything I could get my hands on. I was going to nonviolent communication workshops. I was learning coaching things from different places, different sources. I was going off to weekend retreat things with different groups and doing meditation, going to therapy. Like all these things were happening for me, and my interest just kept going up in that area. And if I go back earlier, I think there was already an intrinsic interest that I had in the social or the relational dimension of working together, especially as engineers. I didn't really realize how significant that was at first, but definitely there were these moments in time throughout my engineering career that kind of stuck with me, where I'm like, oh wow, like coordinating the efforts of a bunch of smart people together can really be like wrangling cats. Everyone kind of has very strong opinions and they think they want to do it their way. And I knew for me, I was like, if somebody disagrees with me, that just must mean they don't understand me. So the only response that I knew to do was to just explain myself again, I don't know, better or something. And it was like, okay, I'm coming off kind of like a jerk. Looking back, this is partly why I think I wasn't getting the respect that I wanted, because I was actually really a good listener. I wasn't really thinking of things from the other person's point of view. And if I had, I probably would have gotten along a lot further sooner than I did in the engineering part of my career. So I was like, let me just do this full time. I got very excited about everything that I was learning and applied some of my systematic thinking to this touchy feely world, which when I jumped over to that world, I found there was not a lot of systematic thinking in most of the folks I was encountering. I'm like, can I fuse these things together in some way? Interest and desire on both sides of my mind, you could say, my being, the systems oriented one and the relationally oriented one kind of led me to where I am today. So, yeah, that's a version of the story.
That's very powerful. How nerdy were you back in the day?
I
Like
mean,
nerd street creds. I don't know.
nerd
Like,
cred. I mean, I was first on the internet in 1992 on a Unix command prompt. All my early interactions on the internet were from a Unix command prompt.
1992 on the internet. That's wild.
Yeah.
That predates me by a few years. I got on, in university 94, 95. But
Mhm.
we had the Mosaic web browser. No, sorry,
Yep.
but Mosaic, yes.
I used Mosaic on X Windows at the computer labs
Yeah.
right when it came out.
And I guess you talked about the struggle with intimate relationships just not making sense at that time. There were two things that occurred to me when you said that. One is I went off and became a monk, which is one way of handling the intimate relationship issue. And I basically had my intimate relationship issues completely sorted out until I eventually got into a relationship and left being a monk. But I appreciate now, much better than I did then, the challenge and the nuance, right? It's like interacting in close quarters, shall we say. It's like hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
Real emotional, tactical stuff as where there is this incredible sensitivity that it's just very different when you're relating with computers, right?
Absolutely.
You can
Yeah.
always debug the computer in the end, right?
And there is more geek cred, I suppose. Like, I was the top math and science student in high school. And part of this, I think, looking back, it was like I liked getting the right answer, right? This kind of like you're writing an essay and somebody's going to tell you what they thought about what you wrote about something. I'm like, this is very unpredictable, but like I could debug I could check my math homework to make sure that I got the right answer. Like that was very satisfying.
Nice.
And that type of rationality that kind of comes
Yeah.
from the math and science mindset is like there's a problem and it can be solved, and there's sort of a meticulousness, right? And then when it becomes like an engineering career, it's like, hey, there's a bug, okay, turn it off or stop it, open it up, look at it, find it, change it, and then start it over again. And that's pretty cool, right? But you can't really I can't go over there to your mind, Andrew, and like edit your beliefs. I can't rewind our relationship back to like, let's just erase everything and just start from ground zero again. Like those options don't exist in a relational system. I guess psychologically, the fact that there's a part of me that like got so much mileage out of relating with the world in this kind of engineering or technical way, that like when there's something that presents that doesn't really, it can't really apply that, it can feel like, I don't know, like I'm not capable or I'm dumb about something, or the other way around is kind of like this stuff is just whatever. It's like a illogical, irrational part of the reality, or people are the problem, people are dumb, or they don't. It's like, but it's just the wrong tool for the job. So then it would feel like, I guess I just should give up on it, or I don't know, just kind of try to pretend my way through something that inside I'm having all these judgments about. Like, I just didn't know what to do.
I love the framing of when you encounter a seemingly, the messy problem of relating, for example, it
Hmm.
either implies that we don't have the capacity to solve the problem, which brings up all of the shame and humiliation and I'm not good enough stuff.
Hmm.
That's a shout out to anybody out there who's searching for a job right now or dating. Like all of those things are so much
Yeah.
provoking that sense of inadequacy, that fear. Or it's an unsolvable problem. The thing's just broken. I think we just need to throw this one away and walk away and find something different. And it's interesting how binary those things are. And I really picked up on what you
Mhm.
said about how satisfying it is to be right and have that clarity. I was talking with a friend of my dad whose career was as a political strategist in
Oh,
Maryland. And he said, I have a lot of friends who are engineers, and we try to have conversations, but we talk right past each other. He said, because they always assume that there is a right answer or that there's right and wrong answers. And
mhm.
in his domain of being a political strategist, it is uber messy, even contradictory, self-contradictory.
Yeah.
You know the person doesn't believe this, but they're saying the opposite of what you think they believe anyway. I guess if I can tie that quick in an attempt to rescue that reference back to systems thinking, if you have a
Yeah.
convoluted system or even just trying to untie a knot, sometimes the way to make the string go that way is to pull the string this way because you're in system dynamics, you need
Yes.
to sometimes do things that look completely and totally counterintuitive.
Yes.
And it really does baffle and mess with this more simplistic binary right, wrong, yes, no, true, false.
Yes. Totally. I mean, I think you're actually striking on something that was an insight that is pretty foundational to meta relating. Like this, it is a system, but it's a different kind of system, right? And so if it's a simple machine, right? Like simple cause and effect, or kind of this, a lot of the stuff that we do has this kind of logic to it in code, or the machines that we build. We just, yeah, we go, it's just Newtonian, man. But if it's a complex dynamic system, that's number one. And number two, you are part of the system, right? It's like step one with your computer. Like, did you try rebooting? And it's like, you just simply don't get to do that. Like with yourself, you don't go like, can I just go back to, right? There's an intrinsic history to you as a person, to your relationships. There is no kind of going back to undo. So once you kind of have this, okay, there's an aspect of this is probabilistic, right? It's not deterministic in a strict way. I'm not deterministic even, I mean, the personal growth world, it's like, how come I don't really just do everything that I say that I want to do, or just achieve the goals that I set myself out to? I'm like, well, that's in part because we change our minds, but in part because, like, the self-management in and of itself is an inexact thing. So when you expand that to the relationship, some of these things do feel like paradoxical. One of my favorite moments in the Seinfeld TV show is where George decides he's going to do the opposite. Right? He goes, if everything I've been doing so far has like led to this kind of like my life being basically a failure, I don't know exactly how he phrased it. I should just mistrust every intuition that I have. So I should just do the opposite. So he goes up to this woman and he goes like, I don't have a job and I live with my parents. And she's like, really? Very interesting. And he ends up dating her and he's like, why is this working? It's really funny, but I think part of what's funny about it is not just like, oh, people can relate to that, but the underlying logic of like, how do I interact with the system that I am a part of will often feel sometimes like the opposite of how you would interact with a system that's like a machine that's outside of you that you're trying to kind of repair or fix or solve. It just, the logic is different, but it's not illogical. That was the thing that I had to realize was like, okay, it's not just like whatever, throw up my hands and be like, I give up, I guess. Just a different approach. And that's part of the design of meta relating, is to get people into thinking of their relationships as these living systems that have a history and that you are a part of. They have a life of their own, really, a logic internal to them.
That's quite Wait, I just want to repeat, make sure I captured, to think of these relationships themselves
Mm-hmm.
as a living system that have a history and a relation and a life to them.
Yep. Yep.
See, that's quite significant. I'll throw one thing in there and then I'd love to come back to that point. But on the Seinfeld thing, I don't know how philosophically deep the Seinfeld writing team went into this, but it reminds me when one of my Buddhist teachers, who's the global spiritual director of this tradition for the last 16 years, first female, first Buddhist nun to actually be the head of this tradition in its
Mm.
history, gave a quip at one point years ago in a teaching. She's, if you want to simplify the way of practicing Buddhist teachings, here's a real simple heuristic. She didn't use the word heuristic, but just do the opposite of everything you would normally think to do. And I really took that to some degree as operating instructions, like where I want to be stingy, try to be generous, where I want to be angry, try to be patient, for example, where I want to be reckless, I try to be disciplined, for example. It is not good to take that as absolute advice.
Right.
But directionally, there is something really interesting there because what it does, it gives you options, right? Whereas all of your system is driving towards one set of patterns and behaviors of actually, I could do the exact opposite. And I think that's the power.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel like I could do the exact opposite of what I'm
Mm-hmm.
inclined to do, then that is super powerful because it gives you the option, it gives you the freedom. And you think about the value of optionality. But I did want to come back to this idea of relating, because that's been very
Yeah.
significant for me just in the last 6 months. Some of the learning that I've been doing from Peter Senge, that in particular, he drew two stick figures. There was a class he was doing. He drew two stick figures. He's like, person A, person B. And he said, how many agents, how many actors are there in this dynamic? And, we're all like, two?
Yeah.
And he said, there are at least three. There's person A,
Mm-hmm.
there's person B, and then there's the relationship. And that relationship has a life of its own. The last thing I'll throw out here is, like this podcast, neither of us have any idea where this conversation is going.
Right. Yeah.
It's an emergent phenomena. It's going to take on a life of its own, but it's interesting. There's something that will emerge out of that. So tell me more about, when did you come to that interpretation that that relationship itself has a history and a agency?
I don't know exactly the first moment I encountered this, but it did become part of a course I was teaching around 2014. I would read the Robert Bly poem, The Third Body, to the students, which talks about this third entity, the
Mm,
relational
mm,
entity.
mm,
And I was also got familiar with family systems therapy. This is
mm,
not internal family systems, it's a different thing. It's from the 60s, right? This idea that it's not so much about let's go back and unearth our past. It really is kind of like, it's like husband and wife or father and son. Like, what are you doing? Like, if you ever encounter a thing, this is where, like, I don't like this. You don't like this thing we're doing. I don't like it and you don't like it. I don't want to be doing it. You don't want to be doing it. So then it's just this weird, like, well, then what the heck is going on then? If, like, neither of us want to be doing this or liking it, but we're still doing it, what does that mean? That's weird, right? There's something fundamentally weird. But if anybody can relate to have a moment like that with somebody, then it's like that's the system operating. There's a groove, you might say, or a gravitational attractor or something in that has emerged through your history that feels easy to slide back into that you're doing. That's one way of thinking about it. That's one way to notice if there's more specific ways that it kind of pops for me. So you might be visiting this if you're, especially if you're a skeptical, rational person. If you've ever done a thing where, for a lot of engineers, being vulnerable feels hard or it feels pointless or whatever. Like, I remember this engineering school was almost ingrained in me. Like, I need to have the answer. And if I don't have the answer, I need to appear very confident as though I know the answer and then figure it out later, or that I could figure it out easily. Like, I'm the big brain, and almost like this subtle status contest that sort of happens in engineering cultures sometimes.
I
And it
would point out that is not strictly rational behavior, but please continue.
totally, it isn't.
And,
It
and,
isn't.
and, by, and by the way, like when you said, if anybody's ever been in a situation where we're both acting in ways that we know are counterproductive, and I'm thinking, like, has anybody not been in a situation where you know things are counterproductive? Relationship, family, corporation. But please continue. Yeah.
Oh,
So engineering
totally.
school.
And, that it was at my first engineering job where a guy on the team, like we were all at a team meeting, and was the manager was like, hey, asking this guy like, what about this? And he's just like, I don't know that. Let me figure that out and get back to you. And it was a very simple moment. And I was like, wow, I would have never thought to say I don't know something in front of a group of engineers. And then I was suddenly like, I trust this guy. And then I was like, that's surprising. Not only surprising that he said it, I was surprised that I felt more trust in him and nothing seemed like a big deal. It was a weird, very small moment, but it really set the stage where it's like, and then when I started doing this personal growth work, I would go to these workshops and people would be like, hey, what's really going on? And I'll be like, I could feel all these ways I wanted to kind of explain, put on a front or some kind of the facilitator, someone would get very in there like, hey, no, but really. And then I would admit something like, I'm just feeling scared that you're not going to like me or something like this. And then everyone would go like, yes. And I'd be like, what's happening? Right. Like that would feel like if I actually admit that's going to really mess things up. Right. But then suddenly I'm opening up and feeling vulnerable, admitting something about myself that doesn't feel exactly like my best self and not really how I want them to perceive me and not really even what I think that is going to be good for our connection. For me to admit that suddenly is good for the connection. And then I'm like, whoa, okay, that's another weird one. This isn't just about being vulnerable all the time. It's not like you turn that into a rule and then crank that up to 11 forever. Moments where it feels like you did something that you thought wasn't gonna work or something, or that you shouldn't do, and then suddenly the positive result happens. Right? It's like when you stop trying to impress, then you become more impressive. When you stop needing the stuff, they want to give it to you for free. When you're less available, that's when they want you around. Like these are all things that can feel icky and manipulative. I do want to say, like politicians and certain people will use those techniques like instrumentally, right? To manipulate or exploit, but their underlying relational logic actually kind of works. But the truth is that there's a non-manipulative version of this, which is just like, well, if I honestly don't know, and I say that I honestly don't know, that's probably going to benefit the trust that we have. Like if I'm actually less available than I would like to be, and instead of me pretending that I'm available and then not really showing up in a way that it's kind of like your partner would be like, look, if you're just busy, just go be busy. Or if you want to be here with me, just be here with me. But this whole thing where you're pretending like you're emotionally available, but not being emotionally available when you're with me is not working. So pick one. Like, don't try to be the good boyfriend or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Just be who you are. And then suddenly feels like that's kind of okay. And it's like, yeah, that is okay. Right. Like, I'd rather kind of hear it straight from you than for you to be putting on some kind of pretend version of yourself for my sake, right? That also doesn't feel good. Anyway, I do think technical rational people can find the relational dynamics sometimes not just like not logical, but like this is bad. You should like if I work on myself relationally, then I'm going to turn into one of these political operator people or these manipulative people. Doesn't mean understanding the way the system's logic and using it for good does not intrinsically make you into, I don't know, one of these manipulative people that doesn't use it for good.
That's very interesting. That's two thoughts on that. Briefly, I feel like the more senior I have become in my career, the more
Mm-hmm.
comfortable I have become asking very stupid questions.
Yeah.
And so I see that as a mark of seniority. If I see somebody who says, "Oh, you just use this acronym, UBT. What's UBT?" As opposed to somebody slinging out an acronym UBT and everybody else is silent because
Yeah,
they don't want to be the one who seems like, oh, you don't know what a UBT is? I
exactly.
mean, Porch, I mean, seriously? 2026, you don't know what a UBT is?
Yeah.
And I would love if that goes viral as a result of this podcast. Like, what is a UBT actually? DM me if anybody's curious what a UBT is, and I'll make something up. But that fear of being seen to not know, I really feel like you've got your finger on the pulse of it more clearly than I ever have about how much emotional fear there is in not knowing the right answer and how much implicitly there is this dynamic. And it's actually quite a competitive dynamic of math, engineering, science. It's like not, and it's a little bit like, and there's a bro thing to this as well. Like
There can be, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
there can be a bit of a bro culture as well around this wanting to be seen to be, right all the time and not being open. Yeah, the adjacency, the ethical adjacency of this,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like, well, I don't want to be a sales guy. I don't, yes, I want my project to get funded. I don't want the team to get laid off, but I don't want to be like a sales guy who's like systematically making the case for why this team is essential and why we should get funding. And I think that there's a lot of well, certainly in my case, because I have very strongly, like, the good evil thing has been a big part of that dichotomy has been a big part of my psychology. But feeling like sales is, and marketing or money or whatever else, there's a big, like, money is evil thing in the culture, and then adjacent to that is sales is evil and marketing is evil.
Sure.
That,
Yeah.
that's a bit strong, but there's an attractor that gathers some, and politics is evil, and like there's a lot of these things that are evil adjacent.
Yeah.
But I think it's because we're not precisely understanding what we're actually talking about. Like, we group things together inappropriately. I'm also thinking of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. Is it
Yeah.
48, I think?
Yeah.
And he said, like, power is neutral. But that book is the most banned book in prisons, like prison libraries around the world. That is the most banned book.
Yeah.
You don't want to,
I mean, it shows up too sometimes in the kind of, especially as technology has advanced, it's almost like more and more companies are becoming technology companies, or some part of the companies, like of every company, if it gets sufficiently big, just has a technology company inside of it, IT or something like this. But gap, that divide, sometimes it feels like, between the engineering types and the rest of the organizations. I remember my first startup was like, there was the sales floor and the engineering floor, and it was just going between the floors, which just felt super weird, right? You're like, the engineers were just all like very quietly with our big headphones on, just going, and then we'd be like, "Did you go down to the sales floor?" And like they're on the phones and they're getting excited,
talking to each other. Disgusting. It's like they're just sitting in the cafeteria, they're just chatting, sitting back. Doesn't make any sense. Like, where's the productivity?
Where's the product? Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's easy to kind of poke fun at sales culture. I mean, it's a thing, but all throughout, there's some. Actually, there's a way that my rational mind sort of unwinds itself. If I look back historically, because I'm like, okay, so we're building this product. We got this team of like 50 engineers at HP. We're building this product, and it's like, well, like, why are we building this product? Like, but this particular product, right? It's like, I didn't decide that I wanted to build this product. I just have a job. But somebody somewhere thought, and you kind of go, okay, so there was market research, right? There's a department that's trying to figure out where the company could go based on what we can do that the market might need or want. And then there's some executives that are kind of weighing this decision financially, and there's some amount of disagreement. But at that level of going like, well, should we strategically go this way or go that way or build this product or that product? At that point, it's like, oh, there isn't a right answer. That is not like debug the code to make the machine go like this and work. A market, a culture, a country, a society, right? These things are like, it's not just random, right? It's not like playing the stock market is not like getting the right math answer. You know what I mean? These decisions at the level of, well, what product are we even making? are intrinsically fuzzy decisions, right? And we can be mistaken, but not know that we're mistaken until after the fact, right? So at some level, like at the level of like, this is the engineering department and this is what we're asking you to create. We're asking you to build this thing, right? That sort of like puts a stake in the ground, which is like a problem that we're all solving for, right? And that's where the kind of like traditional rational systemic thinking works. But when you go above that level in deciding where you're going to put that stake, it's a different kind of problem, right?
And I find it amazing that on some level, these interpersonal dynamics, company dynamics, and so forth, on some level, they are reducible to, is this a complicated problem or a complex problem? It would be one way of distinguishing, yeah. Right?
Yes.
And especially the bit where there's at least two kinds of complex systems, right? One is a complex system that you can look at from arm's length. The other is a complex system where you're part of the system, as you were saying earlier, right? And that one is really tricky, right? And it's like that's why I think often people say that the people problems are the hardest problems.
Yes.
But that dealing with uncertainty, it's also very striking to me how, when I wrote this book a few years ago, Flow Engineering, and one of the big conclusions we came to was that a lot of the issue with team performance is very simply just a problem of scale. When the team gets big enough, then you can't see, the metaphor I like saying is you can't see from one end of the company to the other end of the company. It's like you can't see the big picture. And the most critical thing, I think, for everybody on a project team at HP or wherever else is knowing what the heck you're supposed to be doing and why. And if you have the knowledge of like what it is that you're supposed to be building and why, it dramatically changes how you approach building it. And if for whatever reason you're far enough down in the hierarchy and your onboarding was limited enough and you're busy enough just solving the technical details of the thing that you don't actually know what you're doing, it's very problematic. And at the risk of, can I be vulnerable with you?
Yeah, sure.
My first big assignment as a Salesforce consultant 13 years ago I was working for AOL. And my first reaction was like, wait, they're still around? But at the time, they were still around. And I was assigned to build the retention flow. And they just said, can you build the retention flow? And I'm like, sure, I can do anything you want. I'm like, this nice intrinsic confidence. Like, sure, retention flow, sure. What is it? And they had some description of the thing. And I'm like, yeah, I'm working on the retention flow. I worked for a year on the retention flow. I wrote so much really bad code early in career, so it was pretty ugly. I wrote a lot of really bad code and spent a lot of hours, hundreds of hours, maybe 1,000 hours. Had no idea what a retention flow was until a year later, when I learned that the retention flow is the thing for the customer support agents at AOL that pops up if somebody makes a phone call into AOL and says, I want to cancel my service.
Right.
The retention flow is the thing that the person says, oh, they want to cancel their service. And so the retention flow is the thing that pops up and what you have to do to walk through with the customer to give them some counter offers and so forth.
Right.
So that they don't quit. But the reason it was quite a sensitive thing in AOL is if you search YouTube for video about canceling your AOL service, there's this amazing 4-minute video where this guy asks to cancel his service like 20 times on a call with an AOL support agent. And the AOL support agent's like, oh, right, I think you meant upgrade. Oh, right, you want to switch your plan. Oh, right. And the guy's, no, I want to cancel my plan.
Did you do this, Andrew?
No, this predated me, but it was this hilarious video. It's worth watching on YouTube. And they got sued by whoever sued them, FTC or FCC or whatever. And so they were actually had legal compliance things where they could attempt to rescue the account, but you can't try too hard. If they really say they want to cancel, you have to let them cancel. But it was just, for me, such a funny story about an engineer, smart guy, motivated, hardworking, no freaking clue what I was working on. And I
Yeah.
believe that the results were suboptimal. Sorry, but
Yeah.
of my work, because you just don't have the context. And like you have to have the context of what you're working on, whether it's rational or, I mean, well, yeah, I mean, there is the point about it's not a rational decision making the choice about the product, but I guess I'm making an adjacent point about people really do need to know the bigger picture about what they're working on. You can't,
Yeah.
in an engineer, just hide in a box. Certainly, if you're doing this civilization changing stuff that is happening, if you work for Meta or TikTok or OpenAI or whatever.
I do think that is part of it. We're very deep in the what is it like to be an engineer working at a big company. But I do think this idea, to put it simply, comes down to purpose, right? And it's not necessarily one of these deep metaphysical, like, what is the meaning of life purposes, but it's connected to that. But it's more kind of everyday. Like, what's our purpose here? Like, what are we trying to achieve? And to know what that is, because especially at the level of engineering, it's like you could just be like, I can solve for whatever. You just tell me, just point me in the direction and I can optimize for that thing or create that result, right? Given sufficient enough resources, time, whatever, team stuff, tools. But you got to kind of know what that is, right? So being able to do that is part of, I think, all relationships in a way. Now, it's not like we have to get together and what are we doing here together, Andrew? What is the purpose of our relationship? I don't think of it that way. Like we have to sort of preemptively figure that out or write it down. But I do feel a thing, which is like, okay, Andrew, Porch are together. And that implies that there is some joint purpose already there, or it's an emergent thing. You could say it's sort of what the relationship wants, but it's good to keep in mind, right? I have, if you were to ask me what it was, I could probably put my own words to it. If you would ask you what it is, you could put your own words to it. And there's probably some amount of like overlap in what we would say. It's probably not entirely exactly the same. So it doesn't matter that it's like concrete or specific, but it is a little bit different than if I were to say, look, you're my boss, Andrew. You're the boss of our relationship. Just tell me what I'm here for, right? Or the other way around. It can be helpful to have a manager like be both kind of inspiring as well as directive. I mean, that's helpful. But especially in an interpersonal relationship, there is a kind of like we have joint authority over what this is. The ultimate degraded version of this is like slavery, right? This person is here primarily, this relationship is here to meet my needs only, right? Like, and yours are kind of beside the point, really, right? That's a differential in power that is, to me, totally unethical. And to most people, it is. And it doesn't mean we have to be equal about everything. But if we're kind of like, hey, I handle these things and you handle those things, like even just having roommates, what's the purpose? Well, we want to have a home that we like enjoy being at, right? We want to feel like some place that we can have peace and privacy and harmony, and but we also want, to have some amount of connection with each other. We don't want this place to be a mess. I want to be able to like walk in the kitchen and use the kitchen and not have to clean up after somebody else before I can even use it. It kind of cashes out at these more detailed levels, but there is some way of saying like, yeah, what are we housemates for? Or what are we roommates for? Or it's to have a home that's functional and that like serves both of our needs in a way that's compatible. Something like this. Okay, cool. Maybe that's the only joint purpose that you have. But like, if it's going to be that, then what we're bringing to the table in terms of like what we like to do or the ways we like things to be or what we're willing to do for the other, that cashes out in some degree of differentiation in terms of what you're doing, but the conversation of how we're going about it is easier to have when you kind of have that third thing in mind, right? That joint purpose. So I kind of treat that as intrinsic to all relating, that living system, that relational system has a direction or an aim or an ongoing emergent sort of, it's not like an endpoint. It's more kind of like tacking on a sailboat, right? You're like, we got to get from here to there. Like sometimes that means we got to deploy the sail this way, and sometimes we got to deploy the sail that way. And, like it's a dynamic steering operation, right? But we sort of know, okay, we're headed that way in general. Even at any given moment, we're kind of like tacking back and forth, right? That's one way I think about that. Emergent purpose.
I mentioned earlier that I see a sign of seniority is the willingness to ask stupid questions. And arguably the stupidest sounding of all questions is, what are we doing here? And like, what's this project about? Why are we trying to accomplish in this podcast recording, whatever else? And it's a bit vulnerable to ask that question because it means that somehow I don't know the answer to the most fundamental question. And it does feel adjacent to, if you walk into another room in the house and then you're like, why am I here? We do have these moments of disorientation, like we forgot what we were doing. And so we shouldn't feel ashamed. And it's certainly as we get older, I'm sure those moments will be more frequent, but we shouldn't feel ashamed that sometimes we're disoriented. We don't exactly know where we're going with our life, with this job, with this project, are we on track and so forth. And this is vulnerable in a relationship to give voice to, why are we even on this podcast? I mean, I'm having a good time, but it is so essential to have that basic bit of information because we are expending these non-renewable resources of time, life, energy, maybe money. But it is so important that somebody ask that question. And that I believe, in the best cases, if you're doing a pitch for a company or a venture capital pitch or something like that, you will get asked very basic fundamental questions like, who would buy this thing? Like, can you actually build it? Do you have any evidence you can build this? And those very fundamental questions, they're actually quite uncomfortable because, the answer might be, I don't know. I haven't thought about it. And so there really is an emotional dynamic to every aspect of relating and just every aspect of being human. I really am still stuck on how vividly you describe this, the issue of, do you have the right answer to a question? And maybe you need to bluff, right? The underlying emotions behind the rightness or wrongness of a thing. As much as we might pretend that we are rational beings, right? That rationality is downstream of feeling pressure to be rational, right? We're like being accountable to the results, and it's downstream of all kinds of emotional stuff.
Yeah, it's downstream of a whole lot of things that are, it's sort of funny. It's almost like there's this vast ocean of context that we're always in, right? It's like your entire personal history, right? Your whole upbringing, the culture, the origin, right? Your whole like career history and all your education and you and us and where we are. We're both in California. You're in Northern California. I'm in Southern California. Like, we can't stop everything and just enumerate explicitly the whole thing, right? But the whole thing is part of how we got here, right? And there's some amount of like, let's talk about it. Andrew, hey, would you like to be on my show? Sure, I'll be on your show. There's some amount of like, we do draw on this. Oh, we got more in common than we maybe thought at first, because it's not just what we saw on LinkedIn, but we have this shared interest in Buddhism or shared interest in philosophy or commonality about integral stuff or whatever. We discover it, and it sort of feels like, oh, there's enough something here that it starts to feel like I have a feeling of what that something with that emergent relational thing is. No matter how much we talk about it, it's like it's never fully explicitly accountable because we simply cannot. We sort of just trust it. We articulate some degree of it. And sometimes you really do need to, if a marriage is not working, you kind of sometimes you got to go down the levels. What is this built off of? Or is what we brought us together even still true anymore? Well, what is it that you thought brought us together to begin with? Do you remember that conversation under the stars that one night we talked until 5 a.m. and it's like, yep, remember that one. Okay. Well, you can almost do like a little chronology at a deeper moment of like, how did we get here and why are we here? Where is this going? Right. And sometimes that could be like, it's cool to be reminded of that. But one thing that I feel is part of the logic of relational systems is the where you go to like the readout what the purpose is. It has to be together. It actually is emergent from the conversation or the interaction. So when you show up as a leader and you're kind of like, let's take a step back here, like what are we even trying to address here? Why are we even here? And like the further up the levels of management you go, sometimes like those questions get way more ambiguous. And then you kind of get like, can we just cancel this whole project altogether? Or big decisions get made at that point, potentially based on like, oh, well, the conditions under which we started that are no longer applicable. But it's not like I show up and say like, I don't know what it is, but you do. No, like the knowing of what it is comes out of having that conversation. Okay, this is what I was believing about that. Okay, this was my interpretation of you when you did or said that thing. Okay, well, this is what I was thinking about what you did and what you said. Okay, and I assumed that this is meant that we were going in this way. Okay, well, that was partly what I was thinking, but this other part that you were thinking is definitely not what I was thinking. Like that, that's where we as individuals touch the relational purpose. That's the relationship talking to us when we talk about it like that. That's the
And
only way
that,
we know it.
and that David Bohm's famous framing that's dialogue. And David Bohm distinguishing between dialogue, which means the logos or the ideas, the concepts going through, through, as opposed to
Yes.
discussion, which is related to percussion, where we're like banging off of each other, oh yeah. But an actual dialogue is changing both parties. And there really is something deeply emergent coming out of that. It strikes me that the higher up you go in a company, so to speak, or the more, towards the central decision makers you go, the higher the stakes, if something needs to be changed or if something was a little bit off, but also the more vulnerability, the greater the risk. Because of the higher the stakes, the greater the risk of that vulnerability. And so how frightening it is and how lonely at the top, but how frightening it is to not have a clear answer, especially if you came through the technical ranks. Like if you knew all the things about all the APIs, and then all of a sudden you're engineering manager and director and VP and CIO and whatever else, then that is a lot of emotional risk. And well, there's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of pain and challenge. There was this really fascinating thing in your background about you helping these AI safety teams, and maybe this is something we can end on, but this idea that you supported AI safety researchers in understanding their own team dynamics. And for me, that's so meta about because I think we are the most important information system we will ever manage. There is taking in data, there's our mental model of what is the project we're working on, there's the logic we're going through, and then there's the ethics and the aesthetics of like, is it good, is it bad, how's the relationship feel, and so forth. But if you're trying to build safety into an outside system, what is the level of psychological safety, knowing that psychological safety is a precondition for honesty and sharing honest information? What's actually happening in the human dynamics, for me, feels critically important when you look at these AI companies or any other company. But what's that bring out for you?
I mean, there's a lot of factors there. I mean, some of these things sound very simple, right? You could, hey, let's go somewhere that's not at the office. Okay, cool. So we're gonna rent a big home and we're all gonna move in there for the next few days, right? That can just the changing of the environment, being in person rather than virtual, huge, right? There's just simply more, I think of them as like interpersonal data streams online when you're in person than when you're virtual, even when you're on a screen. And then I think there is something about lower stakes interactions going well. I think some of these things are just, you could think of them as like social hacks, but they work to some degree. It's like, let's do a check-in round. Some of the ways like structure as a facilitator could be like, look, just talk about something that like you're feeling or experiencing this morning that has nothing to do with what we're here for. It's something about your life that happened, just to kind of have a moment where everybody takes turns saying something that is personal but not relational and is like low stakes. It's like watering the soil, right? Or like, tilling, like preparing the ground. There's like you're sort of like bolstering this ground of health or the psychological safety that you can
Or
tap into later when the stakes do go higher.
conditioning from a physical training point of view, just conditioning, just getting your
Yeah.
body accustomed to certain. I love
Yeah.
that, like the sort of low stakes trust building. It's sort of fresh and salient on my mind that we as human beings, we do crave love and being loved and being in loving relationships, and we crave trust. And we like to conflate those two, ideally, if we can get both of those things in the same relationship. But I'm more aware as time goes on that those things are pretty orthogonal to each other. Like I can like you a lot and not trust you, or I can trust you a lot and not like you. And now
Yeah.
it's really nice when they go together, but they really
It
are
is.
pretty orthogonal. But it's like
Yeah.
you can work with somebody, you don't really like them, but you know when they say it's not going to work, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And that kind of trust building really being amazingly essential.
Totally. I mean, especially, when people are in like more purpose. I mean, the whole AI safety world is fascinating because you have people that kind of have that sort of hyper brainy analytical thinking, like very this kind of engineering mindset we've been talking about, our scientific, logical, philosophical mindset, and all that comes with that, right? But then there's another sort of world you might find in nonprofits or social activism where it's like mission. Like they're not really getting paid a lot, but man, we sure give a damn about what we're up to. And it's easy in the day job to be sort of like, whatever, I just do what my manager says. But like on the weekends when I'm with my group, you're like, motivate, like, hey, we should be doing this and not this. And suddenly people actually can become more vocal about what they really think or what their preferences are, like because like they're like, hey, I'm volunteering and we're all here for a purpose. So it almost feels like that kind of context gives more of an environment for having high stakes conversations or expressing strong opinions about what we should be doing with our limited resources. And there's some funny thing where like long-term AI safety people blend these two situations together, like the super analytical, brainy, almost like on the spectrum, not very interpersonal, right? With high mission, high ethics, high like world changing stakes, so that everything feels like we're already behind and we got to really get on this thing. That it can be very intense to try to slow things down and work with things in a situation where these things are kind of colliding.
That's an amazing characterization of those dynamics. Thank you very much for helping me to feel into how important that is. I find it incredibly critically. I have a deep affinity for both of those domains, the intellectual
Yeah.
domain and the purpose domain.
Yeah.
And I can feel how intense that would make things or does make things when they're both operating together. And so well done helping to facilitate better interaction in that context. And so I assume maybe as we're winding up, I assume you facilitate this kind of meta relating in, especially in these technical domains? What are you working on if folks want to reach you or want to learn more about how your wisdom can be applied to their work?
There's a few, like if you're like a technical leader, either kind of on an individual contributor path or a management path, and you're feeling the strain of like this, hey, wait, the people stuff just becomes increasingly a bigger slice of the pie the further up I go. Like, how do I deal? Like, I can do one-on-one coaching for that, and some of that is like a lot of strategic communication planning and talking about the relational dynamics with your teammates, direct reports. I can do teams or groups, like small groups. Like sometimes you want to have like a mediated conversation of 2-on-1, or it could be like a small group of like, 4, 6, 8, 12. I think a team like that. Some of what I do also is I like to bring in the educational part because I don't want to become your new linchpin. There's a nice thing about being the external facilitator and coach. I can just sort of show up and say whatever I want, and you don't like me, you can discard. You know what I'm saying? Like the facilitator and the coach can kind of do things that is harder to do if you're sort of inside the system. It's easier to do from the outside. But then it can also create this dynamic of like, we got to have that guy around all the time because like when he's here, he does this amazing facilitator thing and we don't know how to do that. I prefer to complement my facilitation with training. So I do have training I could take a team through, more or less a semester length course if you wanted to do that with your team virtually. I could also do it in other formats. It's not just has to be this one strict format, but that's how I build capacity in teams to be able to do this for themselves when I'm not around. That's the thing I really want to do. Or it can also be co-founders, like early stage success, and now you're kind of ramping, and now the people stuff becomes a bigger deal. Like when it was you're lean and scrappy, just trying to make it, it's easier to let a lot of stuff slide. But then we start kind of, oh, we're growing, or we're getting investors, or the team is building, and it's no longer, hey, we all know each other from before. There's a strain that starts to happen in the co-founder dynamics. So, I've worked with co-founders at that level as well, kind of growing pains moments. Go to metarelating.com and submit the little interest form.
I think I did that at one point with you, actually.
You did.
And I'm so glad that I did, because it's. I mean, this is this is subtle stuff, and maybe you and I. This is maybe not the 101 version of going from being and socializing primarily with computers to socializing with humans. But I really think it's so deep. It goes so deep, understanding how our minds are constructing the world, right? We really are the most important information system we'll ever work with, individually and collectively. So you've illuminated a lot for me in every conversation that I've had with you, including this one, and really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. I had a great time too. Appreciate it.
Take good care, Porch.
You too.